Good evening, everyone. All right. Both of those in the audience today, as well as those who are joining us online. My name is Goya Roberts. I'm the development manager for the Wheaton Gateway project. And tonight is our pre-submission community meeting for both our site plan submission, our preliminary plan of subdivision, as well as an amendment to our sketch plan. So I wanted to set the stage really briefly before we got into the agenda for this evening. Some of you may have joined us in previous meetings, whether it was our sketch plan meeting or even our first site plan submission meeting. And for those of you who are wondering why we are here again for yet another site plan submission meeting, I just want to clarify. We put a few questions out there that we think are common and what we would expect you guys to ask, and just wanted to walk through them so we have some content. So what is this meeting? I think I mentioned it previously. We're both doing a pre-site plan submission, a pre-preliminary plan of subdivision submission, as well as an amendment to our sketch plan. And we'll talk about what the context for some of those items are further into the meeting. Next question would be, why are you having another pre-submission meeting? And the reality is once you have had a pre-submission community meeting, there is a window with which you have to submit your actual submission. That's a 90-day window. We were approaching the end of that time period, and we thought it was best for us to have another meeting to essentially reset that clock, to give us some time to really prepare and finalize our submission. Additionally, there were a couple other changes that we made that's prompting the amendment to the sketch plan that we thought was important to bring to the community and have another discussion. Do I need to restart? And then the next question would be, why was the previous pre-submission meeting canceled? And to be quite frank, just on the heels of us packaging our submission and getting ready to turn it into park and planning, we received some additional comments from staff. And those comments revolved around the Complete Streets design guidelines. And to be quite frank, those comments, after looking at them, would have necessitated a significant change to our street frontages, which could have potentially had impacts on where our buildings lie. Now, from our exploration of what that Complete Streets guidelines suggested is that once you're past sketch plan approval, Complete Streets should no longer be able to be implemented. However, staff felt pretty strongly that they wanted to reference these comments and bring them back up. So we were having discussions with them to have a better understanding of what they were expecting, to share with them what we thought the implications were, and just to have a general conversation about how best to move forward. So what's changing? Essentially, for this meeting, it's revolving around the change that we planned to present to you previously, which was an increase in our site-wide affordability. We are going from a 30% affordability to a 40% affordability site-wide. And this is across all three buildings, both phases of our program. And we also wanted to discuss that as a result of that increased density, there was an increase in building height. And we're going to show you what that impact was and what that increase was. And that increase in building height allowed us to be able to accommodate that additional density. And as I mentioned before, the Complete Streets guidelines has some impact that will happen to our streets frontages and where our buildings are set back. But to be quite frank with you, we do not yet know what the full impact of that is. At this time, the plan we planned to present to you in June, we are going to go in and submit to staff. And as we progress through the normal course of design review committee meetings and through the normal entitlement process, we plan to finalize that and resolve that with staff. We are thinking about it in the background. We have some ideas and thoughts, but again, that's going to be an ongoing process once the submission has been made. And more importantly, how does this affect our timeline? Last time I came and I actually had a community meeting with you all. Our intention was to shortly thereafter make a submission, which would have been in Q1. As you can tell, we're here again. It's Q4, and our intention is to make sure that this plan is turned in between now and the end of the year. Okay, so getting back to this general agenda, for those who have joined me before, spoiler alert, not a lot has changed. You will see a lot of the same things from this presentation, but I'm happy to walk through it all. We're going to go through the introductions, who our team is that makes up the Wheaton Gateway team. Again, the broader team that helps us to put together this entire development plan and walk it through park and planning. We're going to discuss who those team members are. Then I'm going to talk more importantly about where the site is located, our goals for the site and the project, our approach to developing the site, and just sort of our ethos in terms of how we approach development projects, the project's objectives, and subsequently the county's objectives, and just talk about how we balance those things and how they dovetail together. Next, I'm going to talk about the current status, which is our development timeline. We touched a little bit on it in the first slide, but I'll just give you the history of how we got here and where we see ourselves going moving forward. And then I'll walk you through briefly, just a quick flip through of what our approved sketch plan is. From then, we're going to dive into sort of the crux of this meeting and talk about the increased affordability and density, which is really what's prompting a lot of this meeting in addition to the timeline. And we're going to talk about the increased height of the buildings. And next, obviously, we're going to make that submission, which we're planning for, which is our sketch plan amendment, site and subdivision plan submissions. And we'll have a brief Q&A afterwards. All right, so the Wheaton Gateway partnership is made up of several entities, which is the Duffy Companies, Passionate and Sustainable Ventures, which includes myself, our Principal of Development, Shane Poland, as well as our Development and Design Manager, Will Combs, who are all here this evening. We're also partnered with Wilco, as well as the Housing Opportunities Commission of Montgomery County. Duffy Companies is a third-generation family-owned development business. They also do development, and they are their own general contractor and owner. They focus on long-term holding for all of their buildings and assets, and they have a high focus on quality and durability and sustainability. We, PS Ventures, are a boutique development firm. We take a science-based approach to the way we design and develop these buildings. Similar to the Duffys, we focus on long-term, not just merchant building, which is developing and selling. We also have an expertise in curating just the right team to help us achieve our goals, whether it be our sustainability goals or otherwise. Next, we have Wilco. They've been around since the 1960s. They're a locally owned firm. They are a developer, owner, investor, and they manage their own properties. They have a deep understanding of the Washington metropolitan area and are particularly uniquely adept to identifying opportunities in the local market. And here's the representative from Wilco, Bob Mazuka. And finally, our partner, Housing Opportunities Commission of Montgomery County. They're a quasi-governmental agency in Montgomery County that focuses on affordable housing. They're mission-based. So their mission is to provide affordable housing, support services that enhance the lives of low and moderate income families in Montgomery County. They develop primarily multifamily buildings. They own and operate those, and they're a manager of those buildings. And they have similar focuses in terms of long-term holders, quality and durability. And here's the executive team on the top, Chelsea Andrews, Kayreen Brown, and Zach Marks, as well as Dejana Donahue and Alex Lawrence, who work with us on a daily basis. So the theme that you're hearing and that we will continue to reiterate is that all of us have a commonality, all of the entities that make up Wheaton Gateway, which is that we're developers and or owners. We focus on the long term, and we focus on quality and durability because that supports our belief in being long-term holders. Now, this is just to highlight the different team members that are part of the team that helps develop Wheaton Gateway. It takes a lot of different hands, a lot of different minds and skill sets in order to make a project like this a reality. Everything from architects, engineers, various types of consultants are involved in this effort. Again, we don't think we would be successful if we didn't curate the right team, and we just want to emphasize that it takes a series of people in order to make this successful. Now, to talk a little bit about the project's goals. So we want to make sure that there's a mix of uses, right? And that we have a vibrant and healthy community, a little bit of commercial mixed use, as well as largely focused on residential. We're focusing heavily on providing a range of incomes. We want to make sure this is a mixed income community. And by mixing the incomes and taking a strategic approach that we've done on a number of occasions with HOC, I think it promotes diversity and affordability in our projects. We want to make sure the project can achieve the highest standards in resiliency and sustainability. And I have several other slides where we can talk about what the sustainability goals, but as we mentioned, that is our focus. Our focus is high performance buildings. So we want to make sure we can achieve the top tier certifications that gets us sort of the highest performing building that we can build at the time. We want to make sure we develop spaces that benefit the broader community. Rest assured that when we think about how we approach these projects or we're tackling challenges, we're not just looking at it from the mindset of the developer. We're looking at the fact that we need affordable housing. We're looking at the adjacent neighborhoods. We're trying to take into consideration a lot of the feedback that we've received from the community to the best of our ability to try and implement wherever we can or wherever we have control. Additionally, we want to support a range of transportation options for those of you who know where the project is, and if you don't, I will walk you through that. We're about 2 to 5 minutes from the Wheaton Metro Station. We are right outside of an active bus transit line. We're right outside where a future bus rapid transit line is. So it's safe to say that we are transit oriented. And we want to make sure we focus on not only that, but we want to make sure we focus on pedestrians as well as people who are operating bikes as well, right? So it's a multimodal approach that we're taking to making sure that we're taking transit into consideration. We want to make sure we have a visually appealing design. As far as where our location is, we are on the north end of the CBD. So if you're coming south on Bears Mill Road from the northern direction, we will be one of the first properties you hit before you get to downtown Wheaton. And our goal is to make sure that we are building a building or designing a building that strikes a visually appealing entrance into the CBD, right? Again, we want to make sure that we're focusing on accessibility. This is whether it be ADA, and not only accessibility in our design, but also universal design. We want to make sure our project can support those with different ranges of abilities and make sure that we're being inclusive from that perspective as we continue to develop these projects and get into further details. We want to strive for best value when we're achieving our goals. What I will say here is that we don't always look at first cost when we're developing these buildings. Again, I mentioned that we are long-term holders, and what we mean by that, we're focusing on the best value for someone who's going to hold this building for 20, 30 years into the future. So we don't make decisions about, hey, this costs more right now. It may cost more now, but what will it save us in the long term? And that's the approach we tend to take. We want to focus on human health and wellness. You'll see some of the various sustainability goals that we mentioned focus on that. Wellness, indoor air quality, overall comfort from a heating and cooling standpoint. These are some of the priorities that we are putting into our building that I think will make it an overall better place to live for the residents as a whole. And finally, we want to make sure we incorporate amenities that are appropriate for residents of all ages. We have mixed income buildings, which will support a range of ages. We have buildings that we're anticipating designating as being senior, and we want to make sure we can tailor the amenities to support those different demographics and making sure that we're not leaving anyone out of the equation as we continue to develop and think about these buildings. So that's our project goals as a whole. So here I want to talk a little bit about our development approach. You'll hear me say building better than code minimum numerous amounts of times. You'll hear me talk about the triple bottom line. Again, this is not something that PSV developed, although we would be happy to take some credit for it. We tout it to no end. But what it does is it really underpins our philosophy about how we approach developing buildings. And what essentially it says is we want to build a better building for the people, meaning the residents and the occupants of the building and the surrounding community. We want to make sure that the building is better for the planet, really emphasizing our sustainable features and making sure that overall we're doing as best as we can in terms of carbon emissions and overall carbon life cycle. And then we want to make sure it's profitable. I mentioned it being a mixed income building, and the strategy we're employing here is making sure that the market rate portions of the building can help support an affordable building. Too many times in the past, we've seen examples of affordable buildings with deep affordability just not being able to stand on their own. And I think in partnership with HOC, we have stumbled across a great process where we're using a mix of incomes to make sure that that market rate component of the building is help supporting the affordable components. Again, to sort of dive a little bit deeper on the building better than code minimum, for those who are unclear on what that means, is everything on the left side of this gray line suggests what is required to build a code minimum building. You have to adhere to the International Building Code, the International Energy Conservation Code, and that is your baseline for creating a legal, habitable building that you can permit and subsequently occupy. Everything to the right is what we call an above code minimum sustainability goal, right, or standard. And we're targeting all of these standards here at Wheaton Gateway. Whether it be Energy Star, which is the label you probably see on your appliances in your home. Believe it or not, you can get that for a home or for a building as well. Whether it be LEED, I'm sure several of you, whether you're in depth in sustainability or not, have heard about LEED projects before. We're going to be striving for the highest level of LEED, as well as to mention or to talk back to the health and human wellness. We're targeting health safety rating, as well as indoor air plus, right? Focusing on the indoor air quality of these buildings. I think during the course of COVID, with people having to be locked in their homes, we really saw the negative impacts of buildings that didn't really take this into consideration. This sort of elevated its focus in our mind to bring this to the forefront of some of our goals and what we're trying to achieve. And I think most importantly is to the far right, which is Passive House, which is largely regarded worldwide as being the most rigorous building energy standard or sustainability standard that is on the market to date. It focuses on human health and wellness, indoor air quality, building energy to make a highly sustainable building. So these are sort of our targets, and notice we vastly outweigh in terms of our above code minimum targets that we're targeting versus the code minimum targets. And again, this sort of underpins our philosophy and what we're trying to do at PSV and our whole development team as a whole. This slide is just talking briefly about the county objectives. So you heard me talk about the list of goals we have for the project, the list of sustainability goals that we have for the project. And now this is just a list of county goals that they have for any developments that are taking place in the county. You're going to see a vast array of things, whether it be the sector plan, the bicycle master plan, the complete streets plan, as well as Thrive Montgomery County Climate Action Plan. All of these are various plans that the county has put in place to guide or govern buildings that are coming online to meet the standards that they are trying to achieve. So we only show this just to say that in addition to what we are trying to achieve and what the county is trying to achieve, there's quite a bit to balance here, right? And any plan that we are putting forward is, any decision that we are making is taking all these different components into consideration and trying to find some level of equilibrium with them so that we can put together a plan that we think is sound and that we can make as many satisfied, whether it be residents, occupants, or surrounding communities as possible. So again, it just goes to speak to the large amount of effort that is being put in as we continue to plan and develop these projects. Just to talk briefly about our project status. So I'll sort of walk you a bit through inception. In 2019, the Wheaton Gateway team came together. We started reaching out, engaging various community members and community groups throughout the Wheaton area, whether it be Wheaton. I think we even spoke to some of the community members in the Kensington community groups as well. We did that as an opportunity to give a face to the name of the development team, to sort of hear what the various community members were asking for, and just to have them understand that we are opening the lines of communication. So that actually happened in 2019. We had a kickoff meeting where we were soliciting information from various groups and people throughout the community. Since then, we went and moved forward. In early 2020, we were able to successfully demolish the Ambassador Hotel. We received some rave reviews from some of you about that building finally coming down. But once that building was cleared, we at least cleared the deck and was able to get rid of that eyesore. And we're continuing to take steps to make sure that we can continue to improve the overall visibility of the site. Then we started on our entitlement efforts. And we completed our first milestone, which is the concept plan, in the second quarter of 2020. Now, again, this particular concept plan is a part of the entitlement process in Montgomery County, but not a required part. So we elected to do this, right, of our own will. And it was in an effort to make sure that we can maintain the engagement that we committed to with the community, as well as open a line of communication with Park and Planning to continually work alongside them to develop this project. We wanted to make sure that everybody had an opportunity to see where we were heading as we went through each stage of this development. So we completed that successfully in Q2 of 2020, and then moved forward to working on our sketch plan, which was successfully completed in Q2 of 2022. Since then, we've been working on our preliminary plan of subdivision and our site plan, and we anticipate that going through our submission would be Q4 of 2024. And we just anticipate that this will be happening over the course of the next plus or minus 12 months to get a full planning board approval by Q4 2025, right? So some of you may be asking, hey, I know basic math, 2022, 2025, what happened in between there? That's quite a bit of time. And that's a fair question. So we're working with HOC, quasi-governmental agency, which means that they have certain requirements that they need to adhere to from at least a procurement perspective. And at the time we completed our sketch plan, we had a need to re-engage a design team that would help us complete our preliminary plan of subdivision and our site plan, as well as move us in through actually working with Department of Permitting Services and developing our construction documents that we would use to build on. So during that process, we had to reach out and engage or procure several consultants in order to aid us in that effort. And again, between identifying qualified candidates, reaching out to them, soliciting proposals, reviewing those proposals and making a final selection. That process can be a bit lengthy, especially when you have to adhere to rules that are enforced by a government entity. So that took a bit of time. But not only that, once we made the award, and I am happy to say that the team that helped us get through concept and sketch plan was also subsequently awarded the opportunity to work with us through site plan all the way through our permitting plan. So that was successful. No loss of knowledge there. We're able to continue our efforts with that team. But also up until this point where we were preparing to submit, there was some development of our site plan as well. So it's a procurement effort coupled with the work that was needed to prepare the site plan that just took the length of time between our approval up until this point. And additionally, I mentioned to you before, we were ready to submit earlier in the year. We got some comments that we thought we'd hit the pause button to make sure we could gather our faculties and understand the impacts. So all these things sort of impacted our overall timeline to get to this point. So moving on from there, I think moving forward, we anticipate after we are successful, hopefully in Q4 of 2024 in securing site plan approval, we would then go through the process of developing our construction documents, working with DPS. We anticipate that's probably going to be roughly another 10 to 12-month effort as well, getting us to Q4 of 2026. During the latter part of that timeline, we will be reaching out to our general contractor, securing them contractually. We have identified a couple of people that we're considering working with, and we're narrowing the pool down. But by then, we would anticipate they're on board, such that when we get that permitting approval, we can roll right into construction at that time. So we're anticipating probably a Q1, Q2 2027 start, reasonably for our phase one efforts. And anticipating reasonably probably a 36-month duration in terms of construction for the two buildings that are part of phase one. All right, briefly, I just want to walk through what our most recent approval milestone was, which is our approved sketch plan. Again, these numbers that are shown here on screen are just some of the original residential areas, retail areas that we are planning for the different phases and sections of our overall development. Again, this has been modified. You'll see an update to that, and we can sort of comparatively look really quickly at what those changes mean. But this was our sketch plan. As I mentioned before, this is just a visual to ground the breakdown of the phasing. There's two phases, the two buildings on the left and the one building on the right. That's phase two. So the two buildings on the left that make up phase one, which is sections 1 and section 2, one fronting on Veers, the other fronting on East Avenue, and then section 3 building would be at the corner of Veers and University. So again, that's 2 phases, 3 sections, and just without the nuance, the sections pretty closely relate to a building. This is just a visual. Again, this is our sketch plan approved visual. And just bear in mind that when you're at the sketch plan phase, the things that we are discussing are, well, what are the different areas we're designating as retail? What is going to be common amenity space in the building? What is going to be residential? What is going to be vertical circulation? Those are sort of colors that you're seeing. We're not getting into the detail of where the windows are going to be, where the doors are going to be just yet. I apologize. Does anyone have that as up? I may have to rejoin here. Bear with us for just a moment. Sorry about that. Yes, so as I was saying, I think just it's important to note that at the sketch plan phase, you're not really seeing what the character of the building would be yet. The goal of the sketch plan phase is not so much what the finishes of the building would be like. It's more so about massing and understanding some of the overall gross square footages and making sure you're compliant from a zoning perspective. What you will see is what we consider to be our interim phase, where you're seeing the phase 1 buildings. So that's the building fronting on Veers, the taller building. And further in the background, you're seeing the section 2 building, which fronts on Eastern Avenue. Now, in the interim, before we build the phase 2 sections of the building, we're planning to leave that open area as an open space that the community will be able to use until such time that we bring forward the third building in the whole program. The building is eminent, but we think that in the short term, I think it would be, the development team collectively agreed that it would be a great use to allow the community to have some use of that area. And we're currently talking through some programming ideas, where it be some benches, some trees, potential opportunity that you could use it for a farmer's market, or even have areas where food trucks can pull up and people can come and sort of congregate there, and so on and so forth. So that's still a work in progress, but again, some of the things that we're thinking about from a programming perspective. And this is just an example of what the full build out would be once that third section has been put in place and we have erected the third and final phase, or the second phase final building of the entire program. Again, just another looking here from the corner of Easton University, with the section 2 building more prominently in the top left-hand corner. Rotating around once more to Kensington Boulevard, where you're just getting a full perspective of the entire building program. So again, this was our sketch plan submission that was previously approved by staff. One final image, just to give a little bit of context as to scale. This is down on Eastern Avenue with the residential homes on the left and our section 2 building stepping up ever so slightly, and then further in the background, our section 1 building, just to give an honest understanding of how these buildings have been designed to sort of scale and step up rather than immediately jumping to a 12-story building right next to a residential neighborhood. And this is by design. This is governed by the zoning ordinance. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the increased density. So we have some tables here, and previously we talked about what was submitted before. And I think before we sort of get into the details of this, I think we try to summarize this at the bottom level on what exactly has been changing, right? So I think overall there's a net increase of about 10 total units from what we previously presented to you. Now, generally speaking, we try to make sure we can maintain maximums when we're going through this phase of the plan. And that allows the team to do some refinement as we're going through the design process. As we get to deeper levels of involvement and design, that number tends to refine and shuffles, but it's never going to go over that sort of 800 unit mark that we've sort of anticipated as our top end. So based on us continuing to progress from our previous conversations, we're anticipating that section 1 will probably get another 11 units plus or minus. There's maybe 3 additional units in section 2. And actually, as we started to work things out, section 3 actually came down by some units. And quite frankly, we think that's just probably because of the change in unit types. We designated more units of two-bedroom dens, slightly larger units that take up more of the residential area, but still count as 1 unit, right? So you're not seeing a huge shift in unit count. For this second diagram, this is getting more into the areas, building heights part of the conversation. So as you can see, if we look on the first column, section 1 here is really going from a slight increase, reducing in commercial square footage and increasing ever so slightly in residential square footage, going from about 350,000 square feet to 385,000 square feet. And similarly for section 2, while this increase affordability, this additional density allowed us to be able to add more units to this building. It allowed us to add more height to this building. We didn't capitalize on that height. It goes back to the image that I mentioned to you before on Eastern Avenue. We didn't want to add East Avenue, sorry, I appreciate it. We didn't want to add any more height to that building because again, we're trying to respect that transition between the residential neighborhood up to the more denser portions of the site. So we left that building as is. And then we capitalized on the third and final building section, which is phase 2. We added probably about 20,000 square feet of residential. So essentially by zoning code, we're allowed additional 12 feet of height on both the 2 taller buildings. We capitalized on that additional height in the first section, the first building of our 3 building program. We didn't capitalize on that extra height on the second building. And the third building, we actually only went up by about 3 feet. And that's because we were able to sort of rejigger how those units worked internal to the building such that we didn't have to push the height limits of those buildings. So this diagram is just to help to understand how this additional bonus density afforded us additional maximum heights. Previously, where we are here, if we're looking at this building, this would be from East Avenue with our Section 1 building on the left and our Section 3 building on the right. We had a maximum allowable height of 124 feet there, 154 feet on the Section 3 building on the corner of University and Veers Mill. And then with the additional bonus height, that was afforded by the additional density, the bonus density, we're able to get another 12 feet, taking us up to 136 feet on the first building in the program along Veers. And we are allowed up to 166 feet on the building on the corner of University and Veers Mill Road. But again, we didn't capitalize on all that additional height. We were able to get creative in other ways. This is just looking at this, say, these same two buildings, this time from the Veers Mill Road elevation, with the building on the corner of University and Veers on the left, and the building that fronts only on Veers Mill on the right.
Stories. That's like 10 stories and 14 stories?
Yeah, so just going back, so that went from, originally it was 11 stories, and we're now at 12 stories for the Section 1 building, so it just went up an additional level. No change on Section 2, and similarly, we were at, I think, about 13 stories before, and that corner building went up by 1 to 14.
Some of the reason for the height is it's one of the interstitial layers shrank in height, which is why even though we added a full story, it didn't go up so high, is because there were changes
In the amenity levels, yeah.
the stack.
In the East Avenue, 6 stories?
Yes. Keep it in the mind. Will do. No problem. So just to talk a little bit about our site and subdivision plan. So again, these are just more images. And again, this is the progression that we promised. Coming from sketch plan where we're just massing buildings and looking at blocks of areas, we're starting to get in a little bit more into the materiality, starting to think about color and how that works, start to think about where the windows are in the buildings and where the circulation is, et cetera. This is largely dictated by some of the work that we're doing, planning internals of the building, like what rooms go where, what areas are designated. That helps determine where we're placing windows and doors on the building. But again, this is the level of detail that we're now getting to into the site plan. So again, watch the image very carefully. As I switch to the next image, this is the difference in height. If you're good at Where's Waldo, you can probably see it, but it's a negligible difference that we're seeing in terms of going up that 12 feet, similarly that 1 story. Just from another angle, down at eye level, down on Veers Mill Road, we're looking at the buildings. That's the change in height. It's very slight, very subtle, I think very respectful of what we were doing before and the surrounding neighborhood.
If you want to point out.
In the background?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you take a look at the building in the background, so Shane mentioned there's a combination of things why we didn't capitalize on the additional height. We changed some heights of the lower stories that were amenity areas in the background, and we were able to get creative. If you look at how that building sort of steps out to the face, we're able to recapture that space as residential units, which helped to capitalize on that density, which allowed us the opportunity to not have to push the building further up to get that additional density. So I'll just pan back and forth really quickly, and you're seeing in the background that building stepping out. So again, when I said we started to get creative from an architectural perspective, we weren't pushing the heights of these buildings. We were just reworking the footprints of the buildings to allow us to capture that additional density. Again, this is just a sample of the space in between is our Zen garden and the outdoor amenity space that's sandwiched between our phase 1 and phase 2. But again, watch the tops of the buildings to see how they transition with the additional density. Just a slight shift in the building in the forefront, the tall building, it goes up ever so slightly. And in the background, we're seeing that same shift we just discussed, where the area, the section in orange sort of pushes back to the corner, more closer to University Boulevard. I think this one is also pretty helpful. Again, I just love seeing the difference in materiality before we're at this scale. We're starting to see sort of the use of brick finishes, the color, right? We're starting to explore color in this phase to really give these buildings different identity and sort of use them as a wayfinding point for someone who may be coming to the property, right? I'm in the building that has the red outline. You know, you start to be able to quickly identify these buildings. But again, looking at the change in density and the change in height, nothing is going to happen on the shorter building in section 2, as we said before. And in the background, just a slight pop-up with the additional floor that we're adding for that section 1 building. And this is probably the best view of seeing what that change was in the building in the background, which is our section 3 building. If we toggle, we just see that these middle floors step up slightly and get wider to capture more units, while that sort of marquee beacon area just sort of steps back closer to University Boulevard. Okay, and this is just an aerial of our overall site plan. I think the goal here is to identify areas that we think we're holding out for green space, whether it be the pocket park that is shown in the bottom left corner that's between Upton and East Avenue. Or internal, we have the urban plaza that's just nestled in between our phase 2 section 3 building. So these spaces will be available and open to the general public. And again, this is where we're trying to think about how we can use areas in our site reasonably to sort of accommodate the broader community as well as our residents. We won't go through these in any excruciating detail, but this is just sort of walking through the building floor by floor. Again, as a key, the orange areas are retail spaces, and this is down at the first floor. The blue areas are lobby or common spaces, common area spaces throughout each one of these buildings. And the lighter blue is residential areas. So as we're on the first floor, we're seeing a large contingent of the retail components on both the 2 larger buildings, sections 1 and sections 3, along Veers Mill Road. And as we step through, this actually is a sample of what our interim condition would be. Like I said, we are continuing to program this space and try to understand how best to program it to give it some flexibility for various community uses and to allow it to be available for those in the local Wheaton area. As we move up throughout the building, we're seeing some of our double height spaces, and in some cases, it will be triple height spaces that are being designated. We're starting to see the introduction of more residential over on the 2 phase 1 buildings that are fronting on Veers and East respectively. And as we continue to walk up, we're starting to see more and more residential come into play. This is probably the final floor of the section 3 building where it still has a retail component, still has some amenity space, and we're starting to see a portion of the above grade garage there to the south of that section 3 building. As we move up to the building, we continue to see more amenity spaces, more residential space starting to creep into the program. When we get up to sort of level 5, and through the other typical floors, it's predominantly residential, and we sort of get to the rooftop amenities here on the section 2 building, the smaller portion. And then finally, we get up to levels 14 and 15, where we have a lot of the amenities placed for the residents of the building, some outdoor amenity as well, in sort of the light green areas, as well as the remaining residential. This is just a roof plan. Finally, we go down to the parking grade structure, which, you know, I think we take great pride in sort of the way we've thought through this. The intent of the structure is to be able to afford the appropriate amount of parking as we anticipate for the units that we're going to have. I know there's been a constant debate about whether you're parking too much or whether you're parking to take advantage of what the county has allowed us to do in terms of reduction of parking. Just to be quite frank, we just don't think everyone is there in terms of giving up their vehicles. We understand how challenged the Wheaton Urban District is from a parking perspective, and we thought it appropriate to park sufficiently to accommodate both our retail as well as our residents, right? So we were targeting 800 units. I think we are targeting roughly around 1,100 spaces overall parking subgrade on our property. We've tried to think through the way that our residents would circulate. We understand that the surrounding traffic network is pretty challenged in terms of unbroken medians and being able to navigate appropriately. And people who are residents in the community will be able to reorient themselves and get themselves to different areas to sort of minimize congestion in various areas that get backlogged when it comes to traffic or certain times of the day. We've also thought through the fact that our retail spaces would need to get service from time to time in terms of deliveries. And we've brought those deliveries within the building so you can get to the section 1 building by driving underground, serving that area, getting close to the core for retail. If you're going to section 2, you can navigate past that, hit the section 2 building, turn around and exit out on East Avenue with a short run back to University Boulevard. All right, so we put a lot of thought into trying to capture that into our overall parking structure design. Again, this parking structure goes down to actually, I think there's a fourth level that we've implemented as we continue to right-size our parking. And the way we've designed this is that it's modular is probably not the appropriate word, but we are going to install parking for our Section 1 buildings. And we have designed it in such a way that as we decide to approach Section 3, depending on the utilization of our parking at that time, if we're underutilized, we won't build as much parking in Section 3. If we're highly utilized and we think, hey, we need everything that we have been allowed by what we've entitled, we will put that in place. So it just takes us down to the levels 3 and levels 4 of our parking structure. Okay, so just in summary, again, the purpose of this meeting was also to refresh our time clock in terms of our submission and get back to a point where we can explain the additional density that we're pursuing that's being afforded to us by our site plan, and to basically bring that to the community and help them understand why it is we're having another community meeting. What I anticipate our next steps to be would that we'd be preparing and finalizing our preliminary plan of subdivision and our site plan submission, which was always intended. But at this point, we'll be doing an amendment to our site plan as well to really capture that additional density and building height that we discussed in a few slides previously. As always, all this information will be available on our website at wheatongateway.com. We also welcome questions there. We tend to respond fairly quickly as we can to any questions that are posted there. But at this point, I would like to open it to the floor to see if either the audience here locally or anybody online has any questions. We're happy to field any questions that you guys may have.
There's a question in which I can.
Well, you guys don't have mics right now. I'm having trouble getting to the chat. Oh, yeah, well, I should. Yes, please, when you do have questions. I know there was a question that came in originally.
I can answer the question. Yeah, so a question had come in, what are the plans for utility undergrounding? If you're planning to bury the wires only along Beers Mill Road, would you be willing to extend the undergrounding beyond the property frontage? Again, good evening. My name is Shane Poland, principal of PS Ventures. For those of you who are participating in this process, you know there's been an ongoing discussion about the extent of the utility undergrounding along our frontages. We have frontages along both University Boulevard and Beers Mill Road. Next time you're out there, I encourage you to look at those poles. What you will notice is that the poles along University and the poles along Beers Mill Road are not the same. The poles along University have a higher set of lines on there because those are regional transmission lines. We have been working with staff to work on the extent of burial along Beers Mill Road. We had always proposed and been willing to bury up to our entrance, up to the center road, the main entry. Staff has always been interested in having us bury more than that. Just for those who are interested, it's not a question of sort of you must bury a certain amount, and if you can't bury them here, then will you bury them there? This is a form of exaction, right? The exactions taken by a jurisdiction must bear a relationship judged basically by Supreme Court cases called Nolan and Dolan are the two governing cases. And they have to bear nexus and proportionality to their impact on the project. And so one might argue that, first of all, regional transmission lines there's no nexus of proportionality between us and our regional transmission lines. But we recognize the impact on Beers Mill Road, which is why we've always, regardless of this nexus of proportionality, been willing to bury the south side of Beers Mill. We are continuing to work with staff who have expressed that they would like us to continue to bury along Beers Mill Road, and we have committed to working with the staff to see what the feasibility of that is. It's all part of what Goyard mentioned about looking at the complete streets guideline and what that street frontage will look like. But what we are not looking at, and to answer this question, is we're not looking at burial However, we come out on VEERS, we're not looking at going elsewhere and burying elsewhere. Again, this is not a case of if you have to bury a certain amount, and if you can't get them buried here, then where will you bury them? That's not what this is an exercise in. It's an exercise in addressing our impacts of our community and trying to come up with a frontage that we want the community to have an appealing frontage, but it's also very costly to bury these utility lines. And so Goyer mentioned that this is all sort of a balance or an equilibrium, and we're trying to find that equilibrium. So we are continuing to work with staff, and we are not looking at burying beyond the frontage along Beers Mill Road.
Goyer, I have a question from the online audience. What type of traffic studies have been done? The Jewish holidays log jammed the entrance to Giant last week already. So question about traffic studies?
So we are intending to do any studies that are required by the county. Right now, there's still some lack of clarity on what studies are required, but we are committing to doing whatever we have to from that perspective. So again, we're still working with staff. There's an ongoing conversation to understand where that is, but that is our commitment.
All right, this is my first meeting, and my first set of questions are related to the affordability versus the market housing. And my initial question is, currently in Montgomery County, how many other housing developments have a 40-60 split as you're currently proposing?
I don't know that we know that exact number.
Yeah, good evening. I don't know what that number is, but I think that just to put some context on this, Montgomery County has sort of prided itself on what's called inclusionary zoning.
Mhm.
So almost every new development has a certain percentage of what was considered affordable housing. Historically in this county, that was an MPDU program, the moderately priced dwelling unit program, which dictates that the units must be affordable to those making a certain area median income.
Mhm.
On a high rise, that was 70% area of the AMI. On a low rise, it's 60. The innovation in a way here is sort of this blending or mixing of incomes that we have. And so whereas historically projects might have had a concentration of housing in sort of this one bucket, it's either market rate or it's MPDU, these projects are different. The first project that we know of that is implementing this is in Hillendale. It's the sister project. And that project has, I think it's about 55% mixed income, and then 45% is pure market rate. And even though our partner, this is something we frankly learned when we were working with HOC, even though our partner is dedicated to serving the mission of affordable housing, as Goyer alluded, what they've determined over time is that they don't really want purely affordable housing. They want mixed income housing. This is done for both the obvious social reasons of we don't want just that type of housing over there that has, but also from an economic perspective, that the market rate, which is as high as can be charged. I mean, at Hillendale, we're fully amenitizing the same way we're fully amenitizing these buildings. We want to create effectively Class A buildings. That's what we're developing. And the higher the rents that we are able to attain on the market rate portion helps support the mission within the project. So I can't speak to how many there are, because also the sort of methodology has evolved to more of this mix. From 30% to 80% is the blend that we will achieve.
Okay, and so 30 to 80% blending is currently in existence, or that is a goal that has been set?
Yeah, it's a goal. There's the zoning ordinance, which sort of has the percentages we're talking about, and then there's the blend, which must be affordable to those making a certain AMI. There's a new category in the county called a mixed income community. It provides a little bit more granularity, saying that a certain percent must be affordable to, I think it's those making at least 50% of area median income. I think it's 20%, and then 10% to those making the MPDU level that I just referenced. And so we'll probably be targeting those levels, but because HOC is our partner, just because 20% needs to be at 50%, some of those might be 30. And HOC is really responsible as the partnership of trying to put the layer cake together for financing. And so different programs have different requirements, and they really take the lead on that blending.
And the reason I'm asking these questions, again, not being an urban planner, but I'd assume that part of urban planning was that there have been lessons learned of why you don't want to, like you have segregated housing. You don't want 100% affordable housing project.
Mhm.
And, you know, when the proposal first said 30%, you know, that intuitively or proportionally made sense. It's like you have at least 2 market rate units for every affordable housing unit. And now that that mix is getting closer to 1-to-1, it's, you know, what are the case studies, if you will, in terms of how that impacts a development? And that was kind of the driving reasons for my
Yeah,
line of
it's a good
questioning.
question. I think it's important to understand when we're talking about area median income, I think the area median income here is like $110,000 or something a year. So I think when we're thinking about who the folks are at 60, 70, 80, these are, you know, these are still incomes that might be in excess of what a lot of folks think might be. Those recipients of, they're our teachers, they're our firemen, they're our policemen. You know, again, we go all the way down to 30, which is a really unmet need. I also think it's really important to point out here that part of HOC's mission is to not sort of separate in this way. So there's no difference. We are not programming either at a building level or at a unit level a difference. When I talked about we're developing Class A, we're developing Class A highly amenitized buildings here. And you cannot distinguish when you're coming in who's who or who's making what income level. It's not like this tier is the whatever, go to that elevator and no, that's not how we do it. So I think it will be a little bit transparent or you know, it will be unclear to those living in the building who is who and who is meeting what AMI level. And I would imagine that that might also make even study of this it's pretty so difficult because you don't really know, but it's a good question. And I think that we feel confident that with the level of amenities that we're bringing, the great location, the proximity to transit, all the things we're doing, that we're going to have a balance that's an asset to the neighborhood.
Well, thank you for that answer. The reason I ask is I'm representing one of the nearby townhouse communities, and we have a successful partnership with HOC. And like you said, you can't tell which residents are in affordable housing, which ones are our tenants, and which ones are our homeowners. Yeah. But the proportion of HOC presence is much smaller than 30%. You know, and so again, thank you for articulating what this might look like to our community in the future.
A quick request from the online. When you come up to ask a question, can you give your name so people can see our presenters, but they can't see our audience? And Goyer, do you want to stop sharing your screen so they can see you more fully?
Sure.
I do have another question. Do you have a sense of what type of retailers you are looking to attract to the developments?
I think the development team has a sort of preference for trying to curate retail wherever possible. Right now in the current development, we have been in conversations with a preschool for our phase 1, and I think the discussions have been going pretty well from that perspective. So we're continuing to work with them to understand the changes that this site plan submission and how that potentially would impact them. But that's who we've been in discussions with for that particular phase. We have had some interest expressed from some grocers for Section 3. We were considering a food hall at one point in time, but since Section 3 is a little bit of a further time horizon, we haven't focused intently on who or what we're trying to attract. We know that retail has been challenged in the past few years, and we're sort of keeping an eye on it and a pulse in the local community to understand what's sort of thriving. But we remain flexible up until this point to understand who can best complement what we're developing on site.
A second question was, will this project be 100% electric, no fossil fuel appliances, HVAC, et cetera, regardless of the effective date of the county electrification law?
Yes, that is our intent. We pride ourselves on designing and developing 100% electrical buildings, with the exception that for generator purposes, redundancy, emergency, there may be a modest amount of fossil fuels. But again, all of our buildings are all electric appliances, HVAC equipment, et cetera. So yes, it will be 100% electric.
And hopefully batteries will be better by the time these buildings come along that we consider for the backup, using battery and solar rather than fossil fuel-based generators, but that's the only use.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Pierre Roman and I live in the neighborhood. Last time at the end of the previous meeting we had in this room, after everybody was almost had left, one of the folks in the front desk told me that the small building on East Avenue would be age restricted. Do you have anything to say about this? That it would be reserved for more senior living?
We currently anticipate that it will be a senior building. I don't think we've made a determination on the age restriction at this point in time.
Yeah. Good evening, Shane Poland. Yeah, so I mean, we've talked about it being age restricted, but we're reluctant to commit in the approval process to requiring that it be age restricted because HOC is a perpetual holder and demographics change over time. And what we don't want to have happen is 40 years from now, we find that the demographics have changed. And so the project, that building will be part of this 40% site-wide affordability. I believe that it will likely come out and therefore through its financing, probably be committed to age restricted, probably for its first 15 years. And then often it's renewed for a second 15 years. But we don't intend to bind the property to that requirement, again, because populations age and, you know, we want to be able to meet the needs of the community over the long term. That's part of that long-term thinking that Guerra mentioned.
And I have a second. On September 27th, a circuit court in Arlington County has overturned a zoning change voted by the council for lack of studies, a lack of environmental impact. Is everything here taken care of to avoid a similar fate?
Yeah. I mean, I'm familiar with the case that you're talking about, but I think we're past that. So we are developing in accordance with the Wheaton sector plan, which has been in place now for, you know, quite a number of years. Yeah. So I think that we can avoid that fate, although, of course, the same measure that received that ruling is something that Montgomery County has been considering implementing, which is beyond the scope of this project. But you know, regionally, there's a need for housing. I think the way to tie it back here is there's a need for housing. That jurisdiction tried to use a tool to bring more housing, right? I believe that this is a supply and demand economist by training. Montgomery County is looking for the same. And so while we are not evidencing those same policies, we are evidencing the county zoning this property for higher density near transit and us helping to realize that vision of more homes for people. We're talking about building these extraordinary homes. We take great pride in building better than code minimum. And we just celebrated the groundbreaking of the sister project. And I was fortunate enough to be able to give the opening remarks. And what I said there, which is what I'll say here, which is that I think the biggest beneficiaries of these buildings are the families who are going to live here because we're building great housing. And just the same way we're doing that in Hillendale, we're going to do the same thing here in Wheaton. And we need housing. And so, no, I don't believe that we'll suffer from the same fate because we are under a different zoning rule that was more longstanding. But we're both trying to address the same need, which is more housing and more mixed income housing. Thank you.
I had one last point. And there was also a WTOP recent article about a group of buildings in Silver Spring called Quebec Terrace. And the article goes at length about talking about parking. And the apartments there house are very dense and a lot of nice, hardworking families. And they were saying that some of them have 10 cars per apartment. So I hope the parking will be very carefully thought of because although it's a transit area, it could happen.
Well, yes, we put a lot of time and thought into sort of coming up with our parking numbers. Obviously, these are designated by the zoning ordinance in terms of how many, a ratio of parking to the amount of units. So we've taken that into consideration, and I think even sort of adjusted slightly for that to make sure there's some accommodation. Not nearly in the amount of 10 cars per family. But again, I think we're, to the measures that I spoke to earlier, we are constantly assessing the utilization of the parking, understanding that there's a balance to strike between putting too much or too little. So again, taking a phased approach to this, assessing where we are as the second phases come along to make sure. But again, nothing to the volume of what you sort of found in that article, but still, I think reasonably accommodating what's available on site.
Thank you. And we hope to see you walk around the neighborhood so you can engage with the.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Question online, are you able to adjust the number or percentage of affordable units, affordable income units over time?
I think we are actually, we have to sign an agreement to the amount of.
Yeah, I think HOCS.
Yeah, we have to commit to the amount of affordability that we're stating as we go through zoning, and I think we have to sign affidavits committing us to the amount of affordable that we're doing. So I don't think there's a possibility for adjust for that over the course of time. To Shane's point, we are not committing to the age restriction, which may give us some flexibility there, but we would be locked into the affordability.
Yeah, and it's up to, as to whether, if the question is, that blend, can the blend change in over time? I don't know. We can talk to HOC about whether or how much is a commitment. I think it does have to do with the financing sources to the degree that you commit certain units to certain affordability. Again, they're blended throughout the community, throughout the building. You don't know which is which. But I think that there's an establishment of an initial mix. And I don't know, maybe at the year 15 or 30 at those financing components, maybe you can mess with that, but it's something we could look into. We haven't really gotten to that level of evolution yet.
Additional question was, of the retailers that you're looking to bring in, would you allow retailers to use gas to cook?
That's not our intent. We're focused on being an all-electric building. And I think we are trying to identify retailers that share the same vision as we do from a sustainability standpoint, from an energy efficiency standpoint. We would encourage any retailer that we bring into the building to take an all-electric approach to whatever service that they're offering.
Go ahead.
My name is Judy Higgins. I live in Kensington View, which is a few, maybe 2 blocks from East Avenue. So can you go through the parking again, how it's going to enter? Just one more time, more slowly.
So we have, yeah. But we'll pull up a visual that I think will make it a lot clearer, but we have entry points on all of the 3 major sort of thoroughfares surrounding the site. At Kensington Boulevard, to the north of our site, we have a central.
So you're going
point.
to come in Kensington?
Yeah, there's an opportunity to come in and exit off Kensington Boulevard. There's an opportunity, and so there's an opportunity to come from Kensington. There's an opportunity to only exit their garage on Eastern Avenue. So now we're not taking any traffic in.
I'm so confused. I think I need to
We'll
see
get you a
it.
visual.
So you're going to have Kensington Boulevard to East Avenue or into your project, into the buildings?
Kensington Boulevard into the building.
Into the buildings,
And they
okay.
can also
And no
exit.
further onto East Avenue from there. Is that correct?
Repeat
Is that the intention? In other words, you will not bring Kensington Boulevard into East Avenue. You will not allow the traffic from Kensington Boulevard to go onto East Avenue.
Well, the traffic that we're anticipating that would enter into Kensington would be coming up Eastern Avenue and turning into
East
the building.
Avenue,
East Avenue, I
Okay.
apologize.
It's okay.
It will be coming up East Avenue and entering through our Kensington entry into the garage.
I guess I just need to see a
Yeah,
visual.
we'll
I
get a
can't quite
visual.
get
We're
it.
working on it.
And so from University Boulevard, it's going to go, it's not going to, the traffic isn't going to go right onto East Avenue. It is going to from in between the buildings Am I correct?
Yes, from University, it will come in, yeah.
So, hello, my name is William Gomes.
Hi,
I'm with
William.
PS Ventures. I probably should be over there.
Okay, so
Start from the narrative of no.
I just want to
Yes,
Here you go.
get,
Look
I
on the-
can't image what you said.
Amazing.
And then I have one more question when you're done this, and that is, can you explain what the planners or the committee, whoever told you had to reevaluate and can you give us a little heads away on that one?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep. Just for the people joining us digitally, my name is William Combs. I'm working with PS Ventures as the design and development manager. And the story about the parking really starts at the story of the two streets that are primarily bordering our project, which is University Boulevard and Viersville Road. Along both of these streets, access into the site is challenging because we have these long unbroken medians. You can't make left turns or right turns past these things. And so we have to kind of orient ourselves around the idea that people will have to make U-turns or turns outside of the site to be able to navigate in and out of it. This led us to develop a mid-block crossing that divides our primary site in half, which allows us to have rights in and out, to circulate properly both above and now below the site. These entrances are placed at both the entrances to the above ground parking structures, but also the below ground parking structures. And you can navigate completely in the site underground in the garage that we've developed. So continuing.
Or turn around at them.
Or turn around at level 1, exactly. Speaking of the turnaround at level 1s, each building on our project, I know this is a little bit small, this is just to show the amount of thought that we've put into the amount of circulation on the site. Each of our individual buildings has their own pickup and drop off area. So for example, if someone is just being dropped off by an Uber or a taxi, or they're just dropping off a friend, we've given a lot of thought as to how they'll actually come into the site, drop someone off, then come out, and then from the site and the configuration of our entrances, they can make a left or right onto University or Viersville Road. And so we've really tried to organize this circulation for each of these primary buildings as cleanly as possible. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but to say that it kind of led to this. Exactly. I know it's hard. Sometimes it's hard for me to see too, but hopefully this is a little bit hard to understand.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, please don't. Right. I think the point is that we're on two major roads. You could come from the north or the south or the east or the west. And what we did is we looked at origin and destination. And the bottom line is that it's going to be important to be able to turn around in the site. Right. And so what we've done is we've created the ability to circulate, as Will said, either at the top level, because we looked at if you're coming from north on Beers and you want to head this way, how do you get there when these, without necessarily needing to go through the neighborhood, right? Because again, we're conscious of our impact in our community. And so we did all this effort to show that we looked at each possible combination and to evaluate how you could circulate. And that's how we develop. We call this the Tron plan. I know it's a little bit difficult to see. It actually is. There's a cool 3-dimensional version that flows through, but it essentially shows the connectivity between the different sections and the ability to pick up, drop off, turn around, go back in any direction from within the site. And so that's what we've tried to work on.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
So
Yes.
there is an entrance to the garage before you hit East Ave. I don't know that that's where the Uber pickup and drop off would be. That's likely up on level 1. No, up inside at the first level of the parking garage to allow you to turn into that. There's literally a pickup and drop off area dedicated to this. And then the vehicles, because they've turned around in the site, they can either head back down the main road, back to east to make the left to go up to University, or they could make the right on that main street to make the right to head south on Beers.
Yeah. Yes, I think so. But yeah, and so are you able to see this plan here right now? Because yeah, exactly what James. So if you only focus on the colors, these orange lines, You could kind of see, I'm kind of highlighting it there right now. Yeah, those are the pickup and drop off areas, and those are at level with Veers Mill Road. So someone would come in, make the right turn into our internal streets. They can make the turnaround here, drop off, or pick up whoever they need, and they can just make the right back out onto Veers.
There is no Kensington Boulevard. That's the confusing part.
Mhm.
Kensington Boulevard is not a part of this. It's a cul-de-sac.
Mhm.
There's a wall at the end and a private property.
Yeah, so just maybe it's confusing. The reason that there's no Kensington, all the little black lines at the base are grade lines. They're 40 feet of grade across the site, 20 feet of grade there. So what you're looking at the top isn't Kensington, it's a northern entrance into the
No,
site.
but then Kensington Boulevard. You said
Yes.
Kensington Boulevard. That's the part.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. Nope, we don't get, so yeah, I'll show you where Kensington Boulevard is. We have an entire 3D model that we are happy to walk you around, but here is Kensington Boulevard to the north of the site. And we have an entrance from Kensington Boulevard into our underground parking garage right here. This is, mhm.
Well, I
Nope.
mean, that's, I guess the folks could cut through the
Mhm.
dentist. I know, but that's not our property. And so that's an existing connection that's there today. So that's up to that property owner if they want to, for example, install a gate, do whatever they want to address that. But that's beyond our property line.
Mhm.
Yeah, we are
Of
not,
course.
we are not facilitating a connection up to allow folks to come back. If they were to
Mhm.
come on the north side of that business, come behind it, as you know, and then cut through, we're not closing their parking lot as part of our development.
But do you realize the majority of the traffic coming out of East Avenue turns left? And they turn, they turn left and they turn left into the left lane of Veers Mill, which is always packed. So if there is if it's lunchtime at McDonald's, we can't even turn left because it's a small turn, and 7 out of 10 cars turn left and another left in a left lane that's already packed. So when there's 800 cars trying to do that, I'm just wondering what it's going to look like. Are we going to be in a trap for hours?
Yeah, so the cars that are turning left, right, are turning left. And I mean, all the cars that are coming out, there are no other means of going out there. First of all, let me step out and say, I'm not telling you that we're not going to increase the number of trips in this area. I'm not telling, yeah, so that's not, we are going to impact the traffic around the site. I do think, though, that exactly how that impact is realized is probably not totally known because not all 800 trips are coming out or however many cars at one time. They're staggered. Also, the neighborhood will be able to some number, not the majority, some number of those vehicles that got stuck in the line on East to get out, probably were making the left to go right on Veers to turn.
Don't want to turn left.
Well, I'm not sure that nobody wants to do it, but because some number of cars, I'm sure, are headed south. Those vehicles, for example, could come now up the main road, our center line, and remove those trips from the number of trips. It's not going to take many when it queues up of the trips who are turning right, because you're right, they're not in the left turn lane, but they were likely in the queue to get out of East. Does that make sense? Well, I mean, they were all in, like, the east doesn't have a huge way out. So even if the light is red and the first number of cars might be to the left, one car is to the right, they're all in that line. And so we're in some way, we're probably impacted by removing some of those vehicles. And I think we're going to have to work. I mean, I think we're going to have to look at the timing of the signalization timing and aligning all of that. I think all of that is absolutely going to have to be reevaluated once the full impacts and the timing are known. So I wish I could tell you, but I think it's not totally knowable exactly what that impact is going to look like.
Hi, everybody. My name is Julio. I live in Kensington Boulevard. It's funny that you guys are talking about this because I just moved there a couple of months ago, and the McDonald's, when people are trying to, exactly what they're saying, but that McDonald's right there, when it's lunchtime or it's open 24 hours, is just busy to turn left or right at specific times, but also maybe in specific times could be randomly too. And I'm kind of trying to understand, I think definitely keeping in mind that there should be some research or flow, traffic flow, because I don't think it takes a lot of thought to know that it's gonna be busy in there. It's gonna create a lot of traffic. In addition, I wanted to know, when you're bringing trucks for the retailer, what's going to be the flow of that? Are they going to come through Veers Mill or University? They should definitely not come in through East Avenue or and Kensington, that area, because it's going to stop traffic. Absolutely. So thank you. Thank you for your time, by the way. I appreciate all the explanation.
Sure.
No problem. So if you're looking at this visual that's up on the screen at the moment, and you're looking at the blue lines in particular, I think those are highlighting what the delivery routes would be. So again, this over to the right where he's highlighting, that's actually coming in off of University Boulevard. It's entering in our site. So that would be between where our buildings would be and where the McDonald's is. So they would be entering in there, circulating within our site. So if they're delivering to the first building, they can stop in there, do that where he's circulating. Or if they're going to the building that's further up on Veers Mill Road, they can pass all the way through, make any deliveries there. They will have to pop out on East Avenue, sort of mid-block and exit. But again, we're not bringing that traffic up east. We're taking it in on University. They're circulating within our series of buildings and exiting out.
No, that's not it. Yeah, but I think it was not correct. We would have to go through the dentist.
No. There's an entrance into our garage that's on Veers Mill Road. See where he's circling right now? Yeah.
So if that was a miscommunication.
Yeah, that
then
might
it's a
have been-
miscommunication.
that might have been
There will not be a connection between Kensington Boulevard and Veers Mill Road.
Correct.
There will be a
Pedestrian connection. There will be a
There'll be a-
stair, a bike
Yeah, we'll
runnel.
have bike runnels to facilitate that connection, which the
But not
sector
a
plan
vehicular
recognizes the importance of connection, except the sector plan can't address a 20-foot, you see all those lines. And it's also, by the way, utility thoroughfare running through there.
Yeah, and one thing is like, as they were saying earlier, and I see it all the time because I'm there. People not just come in through the dentist's office, they go also up, which they shouldn't. And I know that's out of your purview, but doing this, like building this, it's gonna create more of that. So it's just something to keep in mind as you're planning
Just
this.
to make sure I'm clear, you said coming up through,
Yeah.
coming through the.
People go
dentist
through, through, what is it, East
the
Avenue,
dental-
is
the
that right?
dental office?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
they go also up, which is, it says, there's two huge signs in there that says, do not go through here, but people go in fast as well. And the reason I say that is because in Kensington Boulevard, where I live, all families, all little kids, and they're all playing right there.
Yeah.
And I'm keeping an eye on that, right? So like, just something to think about and consideration when you guys are planning this. I know you are, so just want to kind of bring that up to keep in mind.
We appreciate it. We're aware of the concern. Again, to the extent that we are adding any extra trips as far as our development is concerned, we're trying to mitigate as best as possible. But again, that is the dentist property. We have a relationship with them. We're working with them on other things, and they have expressed similar concern about that and trying to figure out ways to address it. So, and we'll continue to work with them and aid them in any way that we can. But again, that's a little bit outside of the scope of our particular project.
I have a question from online. Can you please give more detail as to the nature of the delay of the traffic study? What is the anticipated timeline for this to be achieved?
Well, so first of all, we're talking about the traffic study. We have to recognize that we're in an area that the county has chosen to focus on pedestrian and bicycle improvements. So I think what's being asked here is really for a study of the vehicular impacts of the site. But that is not the focus of a transit-oriented downtown in, I think it's the red policy area that we're in. And so what you're seeing is things like the closing of the hot right. I think back to your question about what types of things we're discussing with staff. It's the things, it's the basically layout of the street panel, right? How wide is the tree panel? Then how wide we're providing a bi-directional bikeway. Is the bi-directional bikeway at grade or is it slightly lower? If it's slightly lower in the transition, if it's a 10-foot bikeway, is it 10 feet with those transitions within the 10 feet, or is it 10 feet plus the 2 6-inch curbs? Is there then a tree panel between the 10 feet of bi-directional bikeway and the sidewalk? Is the sidewalk 6 feet or is the sidewalk 10 feet? From the edge of the sidewalk, it's this tree panel or the street section, which is the point of discussion with the building. We've come through consistently with everyone, a concept plan and an approved sketch plan, which basically reflected all of those things within 24 feet from the curb to the building. And it was very late that staff expressed an interest in us seeing if we could come closer to the released after our sketch plan approval, complete streets guidelines. Now, as Goyer alluded, the complete streets guideline by its own terms recognizes that certain projects are at a certain point in the design process and development process. Notwithstanding all of that, we are still working with the county to see if we can come closer to the widths in the complete street guides, which would start at more like 29 feet, right? Not 24 feet. And so the question is, if the buildings were located at 24 feet, and now we're talking about trying to fit 29 feet worth of stuff in a 24-foot right-of-way, that is where we continue to work with how can we do that? Does that shave the entire, does it push the whole building back? Does it just push back the lower levels? What does it do to utilities that were within this 5 feet? What is it? And so these are, in answer to the question, these are the types of things that are coming. And then with respect to, I just don't want to set everyone's expectation that our property, our project is going to go out and do some holistic transportation study for trips. It's just, that's not where the county's requirements lie for a project like ours. It is more to focus on the multimodal, bicycle, pedestrian improvements that we have. We certainly recognize that there are challenges that the project will impose on things like that. And we will work with you to work with, if it's SHA, if it's MCDOT, because we want the project to be successful along with the community. But that we will abide by whatever, as Goyer mentioned, is required of us. But what is not required of us is to do some holistic, comprehensive vehicular study and then go theoretically make improvements. That's sort of the way things were done at some point in this county, but that's not the way it's being done in accordance with the current guidelines as we understand.
Hi, my name's Jim Epstein. Most people will be happy to know I'm losing my voice, so I won't be able to talk too much, but I do have a couple quick questions. One is just in reference to that, Shane. When you're looking at all the county requirements, you know, Wheaton Planning put out Wheaton sidewalks guidelines also, again, after you started this process. But I'm hoping that you're going to incorporate that as well as the complete streets. Just as an aside, something you need to
We've
be
got
aware
a
of.
myriad of plans here, but send that to make sure that we've got the civil engineers here. Let's make sure that like we've got more plans and planning. This building is prolific
Right.
and putting out these things. So let's, if you wouldn't mind sending, we'll make sure.
Wheaton definitely, the planning definitely put out a new sidewalk plan within the last 18 months.
Okay.
So we can get Louise to send that to you and make sure you're aware of
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I think we've seen a previous one, but not the one, if it's been released sooner than that.
Yeah, there was a downtown study that they did recently, and I think they also did a sidewalk study.
It does, the sidewalk study you're referring to is the one where it does it a different, like a boulevard and what it would be and this like each.
I'm not the
street cross-
expert.
Okay, okay.
No, I don't want
Yeah,
to tell
very
you what
good.
it.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
Second thing, just logistically, you're suggesting that you're going to make a submission to the planning board or whatever within the next, let's say, quarter by the end of this year. Yet that process you anticipate is about a year long. So just, I'm a little confused between the sketch plan, the amendment, the site plan. Are they three separate things? And that's why we're talking about a year? Are they all going in simultaneously and then get, reviewed? And
Yeah.
what is that process?
Well, the amendment, the sketch plan, the subdivision plan, those are all going to be submitted for review concurrently. It's just
Okay.
been our experience that after you go through the dance with park and planning with various DRC meetings and back and forth and getting resolutions and going to the planning board, that process can get pretty lengthy. And sometimes there's a lapse in between when comments come back, how we're able to respond. So just in our personal planning efforts, we tend to allot for probably about 10 to 12 months of time associated with that. We may be more successful coming sooner. I would love that.
Gotcha.
But yeah.
So, but your action initially is you're submitting all three pieces
Correct, correct.
simultaneously.
It's not a
Whatever
sequential
it takes, it
submission,
takes,
it is
yeah.
a concurrent.
Gotcha.
submission.
And that'll all be up on their site and maybe on yours as well, I would assume.
Correct. Once
right?
it's approved, yes.
Okay. The last question basically is, we're talking about 2.5 to 3 years before there's a shovel in the ground. We're talking about 5 to 6 years before we really have an opening. You're talking about phase 2 coming later on, which we all understand.
Yes.
So my question is, you mentioned programming on that corner site in the future, but we still have all this interim time before you get to that point. So it's a two-part question. What, are we going to leave it the way it is now until you start on that? And then who are you partnering with, if anybody, regarding potential programming for that space, both in the interim and before you break ground on phase 2? Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you for the question, Jim. So in the current, there's an interim site plan that I think we're going to get approved. But to your point about what is happening between now and that point, look, we recognize the current demolished Ambassador Hotel is not the prettiest thing that we can have on the block, and it has a myriad of other challenges associated with it as well. We're actually looking into seeing if we can do some additional demolition to get that down to a point where we're not going to have the tagging, the additional graffiti. We're not going to be having to monitor that. So again, that's something that we're mindful of. We actually have a few meetings this week to discuss that very point. Yeah, try to figure out how we can get that garage structure without impacting the surrounding infrastructure. So that'll be sort of one part of it. And admittedly, we have had conversations with HOC to understand what we can do from a beautification perspective. Again, this is still exploratory. Once our primary focus is to get it down to grade and then see what we can do. Listen, we know you're involved with Wheaton Arts. We've done stuff with you before. We'll definitely keep you in mind and keep you a part of that conversation as we move forward.
And programming overall as part of your ongoing process, you're not even there yet, thinking
We're
about
not
how you're
quite
going to
there
partner?
yet.
Okay.
The things I mentioned to you were things that the team kind of threw out, but there's still more exploration to go. Sure.
So I have one more question. So so what I heard was that the county, based on your project, does not require any traffic studies? Is that what I'm hearing?
I think that the study that the community would like.
No,
is-
no, I didn't ask you that. My question is, based on the projects that the 3 projects, stage 3, 1, 2, and 3, are you saying the county is not requiring currently in any legislation, anything that to do a traffic study on East Avenue? Is that correct?
I don't believe there's anything required to do a traffic study on
Okay.
East.
Because I
Avenue.
think people were that's why you got a question online about it. I think people don't. So you're now saying there is no requirement by the county that you know of or you've been given information on that you have to do a traffic study.
I
Of
think
any
that
kind.
I think that we have looked at some of the traffic on the state highway, which is University Boulevard.
Well, that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah, and that's why I'm trying to be clear about the answer. I think
Okay.
we've looked at that and how we're entering and exiting off of that. I think that's where a lot of the queuing is actually happening on there, and so we're talking to the state about making them aware. But I do not believe that there's any requirement that we are currently needing to make a traffic study on east. Correct me if any of the team knows otherwise. I don't think we're studying the traffic
On
on
East Avenue.
east.
So so you don't know if the county should or would be requiring you to do any review
Vehicular,
of that?
not, again, the focus that we've been working with the
Just
county
the
on talking is,
university and.
well, it's
and
more about
Pierce Mill.
pedestrian
Right.
and bicycle
Right.
improvements
people live
around the
there.
site, not about vehicular improvements about.
Well, I get it. Okay, I think that answered it. I mean, I'll call the planners and find out. Thank you so much.
Hello, Tom Martin. My question is about just a 3-year span during the construction. And if you expect road closures or lane closures on Beers Mill, University, or East.
I think that's a little bit of a constructability question that we will be depending on a general contracting partner to help identify for us. I think it's very likely that we will have some road or lane closures throughout the span of that construction period. I think it's equally as likely that we may experience some sidewalk closures as we construct for the purposes of safety and just to make sure that we're not impacting pedestrians, right? So I think that's a reasonable expectation, but as far as a granular plan outlining when those will be, how long they will be for, we haven't gotten to that stage yet.
Hi, my name's Kit Wood. I'm just wondering about if you aren't going to start building for 3 more years, I guess it's to echo Jim's concern about the fencing. You know, you have a little mural and a little fence around that area, but who owns that? You all own the property?
Yes, we own that property.
So it would be up to you to do something temporary there for the next 3 years, like put a skate park or whatever.
Yes, it
Or
would be.
it may be in with the community to work with you. Are you open to those ideas, or is that just like not going to happen?
No, we're open to suggestions. Again, we realize there's a need to do something there. Figuring out the scope and the scale of what we can do between now and when we actually go to construction is something that we're going to explore over the next few months. I think our first and primary responsibility is to get the condition with the garage addressed, get that demoed, get that safely cordoned off, and then we'll start to think about how we can do that. Is it fair to say? I think
Yeah.
we can engage the community in some discussion.
Sure, I
to-
think we're always open. I think as Square alluded, the issue, right, first of all, the area was rented to a utility contractor who was doing, I think, work for WSSC. So we weren't going to be able to expand the use while it was needed for broader community infrastructure. Then we have the issue of sort of this parking structure that's below grade. And Goyer referenced, we started looking at how we could beautify the corner. But if we're about to or if we're investigating how we can pull this structure out, we don't want to go put something in that immediately gets destroyed because we want to remove that portion of the structure. Unfortunately, again, Goyer also mentioned the procurement process and how long it takes. So we had to go to, it would have been one thing to just do this all in one phase and just pull the garage out when we're building. At that point, I don't know what the impacts would be to the adjacent roads. We don't have any particular plans to close anything. The sidewalk would in all likelihood for safety close along the frontage. If also for no other reason, I mentioned we're putting in a tree panel where the sidewalk is. So it's going to have to close at some point.
You're putting in what? Trees?
So a tree panel just on the back of curb. Right now, the condition is often sidewalk right on the back of the raised curb. This is not a very comfortable walking environment, walking right next to the cars. So the current plans generally have you placing a tree panel adjacent to the curb. And so we just don't want to make investments that are going to get pulled out. But at the same time, if we go pull the garage out, there's a question, a structural question as to whether it impacts the sidewalk. I'm getting into detail, but to show you like where
Yeah,
we do
right.
think of these things, but we don't want to close the sidewalk per se, but if taking out the structure means that we have to close the sidewalk, we have to understand that before we just commit to take it out. How long will it be out? What will we do for folks who need to traverse that area? So we know it's taking a long time. We wish it was moving more quickly, but the honest answer is we're being very deliberate and trying to focus on removing that structure. If we can do it early, it's unclear. Where like I said, we literally have a meeting this week with a structural engineer to try to go to ask, you know, that we've tried to get plans to that building. We don't exactly know the extent of that garage, what it's going to look like to remove it, and the feasibility. So we're absolutely open. I think the bottom line is to ideas for what to do. I think we could share with you some of our thoughts. Guer mentioned the food truck.
But what are you trying to do?
But the interim condition is sort of more of a park area, and we have that turnaround we'd like to implement in the first phase so that there'd be a small parking area associated with the interim use, so that folks who want to use it have a place to park that's not out in the neighborhood, that's on the property, that we have a pickup and drop off lane. We've envisioned that being, for example, used for food trucks. We've tried to orient the sidewalk where we could see, for example, 10 by 10 tents lining that sidewalk to have.
But for the next 3 years.
Well, I think we need to determine whether, we cannot open the site while the garage remains. And
Okay,
so
okay.
there's not much more that.
And you
what we're
don't,
seeing.
and your timeline to remove that garage is based on how you're going to excavate.
Exactly, and depending
Okay.
on what the engineer.
So we might just have to look at that corner the way it is for another 3 years.
It
It's
is
possible, yeah.
It's possible, but
Depending on what-
it will not be for our lack of effort to see if we can, what we call it as an early start. In other words, before 3 years, could we go? But even if we go pull it out, what is it? Is it a big hole? Is the hole filled with water? Is that something that the community could use? So
Mhm.
it's not as easy as just open it up. Right now, there's a hazard behind there, which is why we put the fence up to make it safe. Then the question is, once we pull it out, how usable is it? Can we grade in a way that will be usable? So we're open to ideas. Maybe there's one layer back. We had looked at, there's parking field immediately behind that fence, right? So do we pull it one layer back, the area that was being rented by that utility company?
Mhm.
So there might be like an interim expansion of that area that could provide parking or a small lot. But I mean, we're open to ideas, but it really, right now, the broader concern and focus is what to do with the below grade structure.
Well, I'm also curious how many acres that lot is that you're going to be taking over.
The entire site?
Yeah.
Or- Our entire, well, the picture I showed with the assemblage is roughly about 5 acres in total.
Uh-huh. And
It's
how
including
much?
Lindsay, Ambassador,
Uh-huh.
and everything.
Yeah. And how much of that is going to be green space?
It's on the plan. I think we're exceeding the required green space, and we are choosing to put that green space, by the way, as that park.
Yeah,
It's
well, we
currently-
truly appreciate it because when Safeway built, they built on every single inch of space. It's concrete. Concrete.
I believe we're exceeding the green space requirement.
So, I hate to see that happen over on that corner as well.
Definitely not our intention, and this deck will be posted. You'll be able to see the site plan where we're highlighting the green areas intended for the site. So to Shane's
Right,
point.
but good intentions are different.
Are there any other questions from the audience? Question was when we're meeting
I
again.
think that the entitlement process is an open and public process, so we will, once we submit, there will be a DRC hearing after that, and then just follow on the website for the different opportunities. And ultimately, I hope to see everybody testifying in support of our project when we ultimately go before the planning board in this building.
Design
Develop-
Review Committee.
Yeah.
Did you hear that? Design Review Committee. It's part of the review process once we submit. planning staff, various other agencies, whether it be SHA, Department of Transportation, et cetera. WSSC.
Representatives of the fire. That one.
I don't know.
Ye-
that-
Yes, it is.
Yeah, okay, so DRC is open to the public. I would suppose so. No, that's it. It's going to be several iterations of DRC before we get to the point where we are presenting to the planning board or going in front of the planning board.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.